foreign journalists and human rights observers who visited the war-torn areas of northern Ethiopia. Welkait and int'l area is the scene of mass graves. The truth of Welkait is hidden from the international community, as tens of thousands of people were massacred and buried by TPLF's tyrannical administration during the past 4 decades. In recent times, researchers from the University of Gondar have identified around 70 mass grave sites, and they still believe there could be many more mass graves in those areas. Alistair Thompson is a New Zealand journalist and political commentator. He is an observer of the northern Ethiopian conflict, editor-in-chief of Scope Independent News. He is among the foreign visitors who has recently been in Ethiopia and visited the war-torn areas of the northern part of the country, particularly Welkait and its surrounding areas. Mr. Thompson was approached by the Ethiopian news agency, where he shared his grieving memories of what he witnessed at Welkait, where people had been subjugated to various crimes like torture, injustice, and killings. Thompson believes the whole world is being misguided by misinformation of the Western media and by politically motivated reporters of human rights organizations. Let us watch what he has to say about atrocities in Welkait. Mr. Alistair Thompson, I know we have a very tight schedule. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us. And also I'm so grateful to have this exclusive interview with the Ethiopian News Agency. So let me proceed to my first question. Please tell us about yourself, your professional background, and also your even origin.
I'm a journalist and editor from New Zealand of a publication called scoop.co.nz, which is an independent digital media publication that was founded in 1999. And most of my experience is in politics, business and international relations in terms of writing for the past 30 years. And I took an interest in Ethiopia as a result of discovering the great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and seeing it as an extraordinary example of a development initiative which was combating climate change and having a great impact. And in the process of looking at that, I realized that it was tangled up in this war, and for the past 16 months I have been closely following the war and mainly reporting about the war on Twitter under my handle altthecat, A-L-T-H-E-C-A-T. But I realized that, I've always known that I needed to come to Ethiopia and see it for myself in order to write about what's been happening here properly. And so I arrived here on the 21st of March, and I'm here for a little bit longer. It's been an amazing trip so far.
You have been here in Ethiopia. I wonder if you could tell me the reason why you came here in Ethiopia and visit Ethiopia.
I'm visiting Ethiopia in order to collect material to write a series of articles, I think, about Ethiopia and about the war and about the economy and perhaps about the dam and about various other subjects. As I said before, I think it's not possible. A lot of the journalism about Ethiopia is done by people who are writing about it from a long way away, based on conversations that they have with various interested parties to the events which are taking place here. And as I'm sure you're well aware, Ethiopia is a very complex and diverse and interesting country, and I'm discovering that every day.
After you arrived here in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, have you directly traveled to the northern part of Ethiopia, which is a war-torn area, or met officials?
I haven't met any officials here in the capital yet, but I arrived just before Easter, so after I arrived, I basically spent some time acclimatizing and watching the Ethiopian Christian Easter celebrations and observing the great singing city where there was wonderful sounds ringing across the city from both the celebrations of the Christians and of the Muslims. And then basically as soon as I could, I travelled to Gondar to visit the University of Gondar research project into genocide and into the impact of the TPLF on what the West calls Western Tigray, but which is the area known as Welkait, which is a part of North Gondar, So I visited that northern area, which is close to the border, where the armies our defensive armies are positioned to prevent another attack by the TPLF, which is definitely seems to still be on the cards. And this obviously had a lot of experiences up there, which I'm happy to tell you about.
Okay, as you have said, you visited the area that was discovered lots of mass grave, in recent time. So tell me about your observation and your witness, as well as your memories in that area.
On the first day, we drove to Donsha, which is the town in the sort of east of Welkait, and I had hoped that there we might be able to visit the Donsha base, the army base, which is one of many bases that were attacked on November the 3rd and the 4th, and large numbers of soldiers were massacred there at the beginning of this war. But we very quickly decided that wasn't likely to happen, and then we drove to Ari Remets, which is a very old town on top of a mountain which sort of overlooks a plain which leads to the Tekezi River, and we spent the night there. And up there I met a monk from the Welkait monastery who told me that in the last few days one of his fellow monks had had his hand chopped off and been mutilated by TPLF soldiers who are occupying the Welkait monastery and have been occupying it for the past 8 months. And we then the following morning we travelled down the mountain into the plain, and we crossed the plain and made our way to a place called Maygaba, which is a small town from which you depart to go to Adi Salam, which is the sort of village which is near the site of Gehenib, which is where the mass graves have recently been excavated. And the excavations there took place in February, and there was 12 bodies found there, and that caused a lot of interest in Ethiopia. And it had previously been visited by Jamal Countess and Betty Sheba Tekeste, and my visit there was to basically further inquire into and sort of validate for myself what I had heard from them. And I mean, it was very interesting once we arrived. The story is quite long. Essentially, there's a very long, windy road to get to Adi Salam, and we left quite late, so we weren't able to spend very long at the site. Once you reach Adi Salam, it's a sort of like a very, very isolated, remote village, and the escort that we had, which was from sort of local militia, security escort, had asked us that we only spend 2 hours, but unfortunately it's like an hour's walk, more than an hour's walk, just to get up to it in the hot sun. And so we walked up and we saw the site, and I conducted an interview up there with Adisu, who is I suppose you'd call him the sort of like the investigator who brought what had happened at Adi Salam to the attention of the Gondar University researchers.
I met various foreigners who visited the areas that we call Welkait, Tagade and int'l areas and its surroundings. Many of them described that area, it is a scene of mass grave. Do you agree on that?
I've seen the photographs of the excavations that took place there, and I've spoken to the researchers from Gondar University, and the genocide researchers from Gondar University informed me that their sort of human survey work had identified around 20 locations where they believe there to be many mass graves. So 20 different parts of Welkait. I think mostly concentrated in that area in the northeast of Welkait, and along the border. And what I saw at Gehenna, and the people that we spoke to, the locals, we asked the children what they knew about what had happened there, and they said, well, we know that a lot of people were killed here. And we then asked, well, how do you know that? And they said that their fathers had told them that. So I think, in that area, it's very well known that there has been a very large number of people killed, and many of them have been trying to tell people for a long time, but nobody has been listening, really. The photographs of the bodies which were exhumed in February are quite compelling, but basically what happened is that the researchers decided that they were not really qualified to be exhuming human remains and examining them in detail. That needs to be done by essentially paleontologists and criminal investigators, to be done properly. And so after finding, they initially dug in one of the places that they'd identified, and instead of finding 4 bodies, they found 12. Well, they'd expected to find maybe 1 or 2, but they found 12, and then as soon as they got to 12, they stopped digging because I think they were also asked by the priests and the local people to stop, because it's sort of, it was kind of horrific. They didn't expect to find that many so quickly. They were there for a week. But much more investigation is required there. That's only one of numerous sites there, and it's entirely possible that there's large numbers of bodies buried all the way along the river, all the way up to Gehenna. The stories that have been told about the area suggest that a large number of the bodies were actually disposed in the winter by throwing them in the river, from which they flow down into the Tekeze and then into the Nile, and they will never be seen.
Have you also a different or unique experience or witnesses in these areas? Welkait, as we said, the site of a mass grave where tens of thousands of people were massacred and also buried by TPLF, the tyranny group who had ruled that region for the last 4 decades.
I've got lots and lots of memories. One of the things that I understand is that you look at the plain. It's sort of like up there they call it a desert because it's sort of the lowlands and it's hot. And there wasn't that many people. They were relatively empty. My understanding is that when the war broke out, the soldiers were the initial attack that was going to attack down the road from Gondar, from Karaka, from the border of what was Tigray. At that point, attacking on Gondar, they were basically fought back by Amhara Special Forces at Karaka on the top of the mountain, and the soldiers then retreated. The TPLF soldiers retreated to the border, and when they did, basically a lot of the TPLF settlers in that region also left, and so in that region it's sort of quite abandoned. Now you can mainly just see soldiers, and you can see the defensive positions which the ENDF and the Amhara Special Forces are taking. I mean, we saw some of them. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more. I mean, it struck me how poor the area is, and I mean, but also it's very fertile, and there was lots of fresh fruit. There was, when we arrived in Megaba, there was lots of girls who were selling us mangoes. We bought some mangoes, but we couldn't buy mangoes from all of the girls that were selling the mangoes. But yeah, it was in the village of Adi Salam itself. The children followed us up, and I think they'd done that previously with Jamal and Betty Tekesta as well. And I think they feel as though maybe the story is finally being told about what happened there. The village there post-dates the events that took place there basically took place at the end of the 1980s in the Gregorian calendar, and the village didn't exist then. And since then, the village has been built. One of the residents of the village came with us, and he was digging his toilet, and he found a skull underneath his house when he was trying to dig a hole.
Human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have ignored, the reality in Welkait, and they came with records to try to downplay and blunt findings in University of Gondar. So, what's the rationale behind why these international human rights organizations try to downplay and provide, a politically motivated reporters?
These organizations, especially Amnesty, which appears to be doubling down on its position in relation to this evening in the United States, they are hosting, their branding is on an event which is being held with Reda Getachew and William Davison and Miaza Gidey, which is, I mean, I find it unfathomable that Amnesty International would allow themselves to be used that way by the TPLF for propaganda purposes. I think they are very concerned about their professional reputations, and their release of their final report on Welkait 2 days before the Gondar University press conference to announce their study took place appeared to be, deliberate. Gondar University has identified the names of, I think, more than 1,500 people who were killed at Mai Kadra. Their report says that there was only 230 odd people killed at Mai Kadra. But their report is based entirely on evidence collected via either phone calls or from Tigrayans in Shire mainly, and in Sudan. And of the four, their report doesn't even say how many interviews were conducted with Amhara versus how many interviews were conducted with Tigrayans. But if you look at the footnotes of the report, it's very clear that nearly all of the evidence was obtained early in the war from Tigrayan refugees in Shire and in Sudan. But a lot of the refugees in Sudan appear to be the people who actually committed the Mai Kadra massacre. So the report just doesn't hold any water whatsoever. The other human rights organisation that was involved in that announcement was Human Rights Watch, and my understanding is that in the aftermath of them releasing the report, Ken Roth, who has been the head of Human Rights Watch for a long time, was basically taken before the board and had to explain why it was that they had signed on to that report. And I think that the reason for his sudden resignation from his position is because of his failure in judgment in terms of signing onto a report which is basically not nearly good enough. So and in terms of your first initial question, which is why, I think the reason they're sticking to their guns is because it's so embarrassing and professionally difficult for them to basically say, well, we've spent months and months and months telling people lies about what has been happening in Welkait. I mean, their report on the Axum massacre, their report on the Maikadra massacre, there's just countless examples of outrageous allegations that they've made based on flimsy or non-existent evidence.
What solutions so suggest to expose the reality masquerade in Welkait? Because the international community is still being disinformed and also manipulated by Western media outlets as well as human rights organs.
Gondar University has a proposal itself, and their proposal is to set up a research centre into genocide at the University of Gondar, and that research centre could then invite genocide researchers from all around the world to come and assist them in their research. And at that point, you would then have a I don't know, a large group of academics who are assisting with that. In addition to that, it is necessary for there to be a criminal investigation into what happened in Welkait. Starting, I think, in Gehenna. There are multiple identified locations in Gehenna where they believe that there are bodies buried, and those exhumations need to be taken place in proper forensic conditions to try to establish causes of death and numbers of dead and age and sex and all of the other details which really can be obtained from human evidence. So I mean, I strongly think that the government needs to provide sufficient resources to enable that investigation to continue. At this point, the first report of the Gondar University group, this isn't quite the first report, but this is their first substantial report. Basically, it's a sort of it's almost like a scoping exercise to understand the scale of the investigation that is required, and the scale of the investigation that is required is huge. And from that investigation, it will become completely apparent exactly what the TPLF are, where they came from, what they did, how many people they traumatized. They've done a survey, for example, which found that 80% of people in Welkait were personally subjected to some form of victimization amounting to a serious crime. And I don't know, well over 50% of them had experienced that more than once. And I mean, the stories that I heard there are horrifying.